Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's episode of Recruit Military Live, where we will be discussing how to speak the language of civilian employers by effectively translating your military skills. Before we get started, please drop a comment and let us know where you're joining us from, what branch of service you're representing, and as always, if you have any questions at any point pertaining to our topic of discussion, please feel free to ask at any time. Our guest for today has spent many years in both the education and military transition space. She got her feet wet in the TAP space or Transition Assistance Program when her husband transitioned out of the Army. This catapulted her professional career into transition readiness, where she started as a Department of Labor TAP facilitator. Currently, she is the DoD Training and Development Manager at Recruit Military and a certified professional resume writer. Her specialties lie in webinars offered through Recruit Military, focusing on advanced and federal resumes and advanced employments, including skill development, interview techniques, dressing for success, and salary negotiation. Everyone, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Miss Whitney Ortiz. Good morning, Whitney.
Good morning, Gabby.
How are you doing today?
Doing good. It's actually a great day here near Fort Jackson. Yesterday was a little not so great. It was a little wet and rainy, but a beautiful day here so far. How are you doing?
Great. I feel like I'd rather have that weather over here. I'm in Phoenix, Arizona, where we've been in the 90s and 100s for the last month now. So
I'm in the 70s right now, so I will happily trade.
Just rub it in, Whitney. Well, thank you for joining us today. I think this is going to be a very popular topic, especially bouncing off from our last live, Recruit Military Live last week, where we were discussing, veterans advocating for themselves when it comes to the skills they bring to the table. Now that they've reflected on it, it's time to figure out how to effectively translate those skills into an effective resume. So I'm very excited to have you on today.
Me too. It's such an important topic too, and it's one that you don't know what you don't know, and you're not realizing things maybe aren't hitting as you're hoping they are. Just going in and making some small tweaks really goes a long way.
Yeah, and I think one of the main issues, I think, for a lot of transitioning military members is there are quite a few MOSs or, job fields in the military that many don't believe would directly translate to a civilian job, which is, is not the case whatsoever. There are multiple tangible and intangible skill sets, regardless of career field, whether you're a machine gunner, a water guy, an admin logistics guy. There's something in every single career field that can be translated into a civilian employee resume. So we're excited to get to learn everything that you have to offer us today. And I think one of those things primarily first is a major resource that you and I had discussed before, and I'm very excited to hear about.
Yeah, so most of the challenge when it comes to translating what we've done is, okay, well, what have we done from the civilian perspective? And that's not always as easy to see, especially if, we've been in for a little bit, we don't quite know what that's going to look like. My absolute favorite resource is onetonline.org. I'm not going to try to finish off, but I was going to try for a second. I was like, wait, I don't remember all of it. But onetonline.org, once you go here, you can scroll down and you can do it one of two ways. You can put the job that you're looking for from the occupation angle there and see the civilian fact sheet of here's what they do, here's what it looks like. And then you can start thinking, okay, when have I done that? When have I used this skill set? And I can guarantee you've done that before, maybe from a slightly different angle, but putting that skill in goes a really long way. The other way you can utilize this resource is if you scroll towards the bottom of the page, there's a word that says crosswalks, and then there's military. You click on military crosswalk, and it's going to show MOS, AFSC, whichever branch you were in, you'll click on the correct one and then plug in whatever number letter combination applies to you.
Yeah.
It's going to take you over to that next line, which is saying, hey, here's what you said you did. Here's what this looks like. But it doesn't end there. So for my 11 Bravos, click on infantry. It's not, oh, you're only infantry. You're only a security forces. You click on, it's like, oh, what did you actually do? Training and development, managing, project management. And there's a whole list of different fields that come out of that MOS or that AFSC or whatever military code that you have that you may never have put yourself in that category until you saw the sheet. And you're like, oh, wait, this is exactly what I've done. And if you
Mhm.
click on that sheet, it's going to pull up that fact list that has, tasks that you've done, skill set. And again, it's all in civilian language. So just taking that and saying, oh, what does this look like? No, it says that I've trained people. Okay, when did I training? What training was it? How long? And just starting to quantify and giving that specific example, I find that's incredibly helpful when it comes to translating from that military angle, especially when we're not quite sure what that looks like.
Mhm.
Incredibly useful as a resource.
That's fantastic. And I know I was super excited. I wish it was a resource that I knew about when I was transitioning out of the military, because you can spend countless hours just trying to figure out what those skill sets that you feel you bring to the table, what those are, because just talking about yourself and thinking like, oh, I'm really good at A, B, and C is very hard, I think, for people with the military mindset, because like we discussed during our last live, we're very much accustomed to the team and the mission and not so much me, but now it's reversed. Now it's all about you and what you bring to the table, and you do bring a lot to the
Yep.
table.
That's
But a
good to
lot
know.
of
You said the
times,
I, not the
yes,
we.
exactly. And a lot of time, that once you get into that mindset, you can even still take so much work, mental work, to get all that down and then translate it. So to have a tool that does that for you, or even if you're having trouble, pointing out what those skill sets are that you think you do bring to the table, punching in your MOS number and it laying those out for you, can get that ball rolling for you. So I think that's an absolutely fantastic resource that hopefully a lot of our audience can take into action.
Yeah.
Now, even with that resource, and in your career field and what you do on a daily basis, what are still some major questions you get when it comes to military members translating their resume and still coming onto some bumps in the road?
A lot of times it's just small keywords.
Mhm.
Maybe we talk about subordinates, but if we're outside the military, that word doesn't usually have a positive connotation. So it's
Yeah.
just, taking words like that and saying, oh, well, like, who were they? Were they junior management, junior personnel, new hires, trainees? So thinking more categorically. Same when it comes to talking about, I worked for the brigade, or this is my platoon. Instead of thinking from the military version of the category, just
Mhm.
use the generalized term. Was it a department? Was it an organization? And then quantifying.
Mhm.
Quantifying really, like, I cannot impress on how important it is giving numbers, because you might work for a team of 30, but that team of 30 for this company over here, that's a department for them. But they can see the
Exactly.
number 30 and they can say, oh, here's what that looks like for us. Like, I can definitely make that translation one to one, because I see how many people or how many direct reports you have. And I know that conversion. I can do that math
Mhm.
myself. So please give numbers there. Put numbers to show your story, because that's going to translate a lot better than words ever will.
Exactly. And I feel that's something that a lot of military members, regardless of how long you've been in the service, should be able to relate to, because we do have, at least in the Marine Corps, what we call fitness reports, or just evaluations, whether they're, annually or semi-annual. But one thing that we got pressed on was quantifying your accomplishments. So you can say, oh, I conducted this many inspections, or I conducted, this inspection, that inspection, but how many, weapons, how many pieces of equipment, how much was all that equipment worth? I remember when I would put down, oh, I'm a training and equipment chief and I'm responsible for this amount of gear. But that amount of gear was like $3.4 million worth of gear. And I'm responsible for maintaining that and, the security of it all. So once you put those numbers on there, they're like, oh, so this person can be trusted with quite, that opens the
Exactly.
door to so many other realities for that employer
Mhm.
when they're reading that. So that
Yeah.
goes directly into, I think, another topic of ours, which is the different type of resumes. And you brought up a great point to me, is that, we hear so many different types, whether there's the STAR method or whatever it is. You're going to be told by numerous different people, different, TAP members, TAP leadership, that you should be utilizing a specific type of resume. But that isn't always the case, because different people, have different accomplishments, different methods. So I would love for you to go into the different types of resumes and, talk more about what could be the right fit for what person.
Yeah, definitely. So resumes, and this is a big misconception, it's never a one size fits all. We all want a cookie
Mhm.
cutter resume.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist. And templates are also not your best friend. So I'd highly encourage you to like not take the easy way out, because it's really just you pushing a boulder up a hill. It's not ever the easy way. Pull up a
Mhm.
document and just start typing. What have you done? What does that look like? And then take that and tell your story. So a lot of times we find, if you're looking to do something similar, so you were a project manager in the military, you're looking to stay in that project management space, usually what's going to translate better is your job titles, because that is what's
Mhm.
relevant there. So we go off of that and we say, okay, well, what have we done as a project manager? We're asking ourselves some of these questions. We're going through the STAR process, that situation,
Mhm.
task, action, result, which really what that is, that's your bullet point content. So it's driven based off your job titles. But a lot of times, maybe we did something in the military, but we're like, oh, I don't really want to do that outside the military. Or
Yeah.
maybe there's not as many opportunities. There's a lot of reasons why we call them career changers. And this is not a military term, just in general. If we do something different, we are
Mhm.
changing careers, career transitioning. And if that's the case, well, do your job titles matter? And
Mhm.
they might, but they also may not. So yesterday, and during one of our resume webinars, I had a gentleman who was going from being a senior paralegal to going into environmental science as an environmental scientist.
Oh, wow.
Now, do they care that you were a paralegal? Honestly, if I saw paralegal on a resume for environmental scientist, I'm going to assume you want to do environmental law. That's just
Mhm.
that logical assumption, like, oh, this isn't a job posting for environmental law. So I'm kind of confused. Like, I don't understand what's going on here. So instead, we tell the story from a skills angle, where instead of a job
Mhm.
title, I would put research and then go through and asking myself how often, how many research projects have I done? What type of projects have I done under the research scope? Giving those bullet points to tell my story. And then after my bullet points, towards the end, I'll have a work history section that says, hey, here's what I was doing, here's where I did that at, and my dates. But that's not the primary focus. It's what I'm bringing them that is directly tangible. And that is a bit of a process. It's not the
Mhm.
easy way. And we may need to go to ONET and some other resources to identify what our skill categories might be. But it's a phenomenal way to tell your story if you're looking to do something different. For my medical professionals, a CV is going to be your best friend. Federal resumes, they're their own thing out there.
Mhm.
But regardless of like what type of resume you have, your bullet points, that is your content driver. So this ask yourself slide,
Yeah.
look at this, take it to heart, because when you say, hey, I trained team members,
Mhm.
how many team members did you train?
Exactly.
How long were these trainings? Are we talking about a 2-day training, a
Mhm.
3-month training? Those are very different numbers here. So kind of showing your story through those numbers. And then, what happened because of the training, the so what conversation. Don't
Mhm.
stop at, I trained this many people. Okay. Well, what happened? Like, did they do their job well? Did they do their job better? Like, walk me through that. It's almost like you're taking a kid by their hand and you're walking them down the sidewalk. You're trying to show them everything, but in a like 2 lines of your resume. So these are
Mhm.
very concise. And that trained team member example that I brought up, that isn't STAR format. I would take
Mhm.
that and say, these how questions, when did I do that? And I could convert that. And instead of saying I trained team members, that might be I trained 14 team members on occupational safety, resulted in 0 safety incidents in 2023. And that occupational safety, maybe it was on firearm handling, but I'm not going to say that, because
Exactly.
that job probably doesn't care the specifics of what I trained them on. Just, in
Mhm.
general, it was occupational safety.
Mhm.
That's another way we can civilianize some of our terminology, because do they need to know the specifics? Most of the time, no. They just need to
Mhm.
know, like, oh, you did this thing, check mark, got it. You can train people. I see that example, 2 thumbs up. They don't need to know all the nitty gritty details.
Mhm.
That can be done in an interview. That may be a side conversation with a coworker once you're in that role. But don't feel like you have to put everything in that bullet
Mhm.
point. Once we get to acronyms, we've gone too far. That's
Yes.
too in depth on a bullet point. Once we're there, just kind of scrub it a little bit. It's a little too much detail.
Yeah, I mean, so many things that you've said that I'm just like, they're all just clicking. First of all, this slide is a gold mine because, we understand, okay, quantifying your accomplishments, yes. But what may not come to mind is how many different areas of what you do can be quantified. And this right here is already 7 off the bat that you can start thinking about and maybe creating so many bullet points for you just in this slide alone. So thank you for, if you haven't already taken a screenshot of this, please do, because I wish I had this when I was creating a resume. Right now, I'm just like, do I want to rewrite my resume just so I can utilize these?
It's
these
so
numbers?
helpful. And especially as the how like impactful. No, that's the biggest thing I see. I
Mhm,
review so many resumes a week from our service members who come into the webinars. And
mhm,
almost all the time, that's what they're missing in their bullet points is they've told me what they've done, but they
mhm.
haven't told me why that was important. And as an
Yeah.
employer, if I'm looking at that resume, I need that buy-in. I need you to be able to connect those
Mhm.
dots for me. So because you did these trainings or because you inventoried this many whatever supplies, this value of supplies, well, what does that mean? Like what happened
Mhm.
because of that? Maybe you noticed an issue. Well, what was the resolution of that issue? Don't leave me hanging. Follow that thought all the way
Exactly.
through.
Don't leave us on a cliffhanger. And what really clicked with me also was that you're mentioning don't get too far into the details, keep things direct, but hit the major key points. Because one question we get a lot is about the ATS, the applicant tracking system, right? And what advice do you have regarding that system, and how military members should be creating these resumes in order just to get through that ATS, in order to be put even in
Mhm.
front of an interviewer?
A great question, Gabby. So I think
Mhm.
people get very scared by this ATS, and it's not something to be scared of. Knowledge is power.
Mhm.
Honestly, templates aren't gonna they're not really getting through the ATS system because of the formatting, which is again why I started off as saying it's like pushing that boulder up a hill. You're gonna have to exert a lot more energy and effort because it's
Mhm.
not compatible with an ATS system. So just, pull up
Yeah.
a document, hand type it so you can ensure everything can be read. It doesn't read columns, it won't read headers or footers. And then
Mhm.
take that job posting, and as long as you're speaking to that, so that job posting is your guide. What are you bringing that's relevant to what that job is for? If we're
Mhm.
doing that, we're already doing a great job. If we're going in and let's say that job posting says that you are, responsible for a team of 30. I'm not going to say responsible for a team of 30 in my resume, but I'm going to show when I've had to manage a team of 30, if I've
Yeah.
had to do that, or however many people I've had to manage, what did that look like? So I'm kind of showing examples based on what they're looking for. And
Mhm.
let's say they use the word, they talk about employees in that job description. And I look at my resume and I have the word soldiers all over it or sailors. That this is one of the easier ways we can civilianize it is I see this everywhere, but the job says employees. I'm just going to go over and everywhere I said sailors or soldiers
Mhm.
or whichever term I'm using, just put the word employees in because that's their language. If I said personnel, I'm still going to go over and change it to employees because that's
Mhm.
using their language and it's showing that I took that extra step and I'm putting it in their terminology. We might call people our certain people clients, they may call them stakeholders. So I'm
Mhm.
just going in and doing a quick brush up, Control F or Command F on your keyboard, find some of those, plug and play. Again,
Mhm.
people make it sound very complicated, but as long as you have that job description up while you're going through your resume and you're looking at that and you're directing your energy to making sure you match that, it's not as complicated as people make it seem.
Yeah, I think reflecting those keywords is definitely, prominent in just getting through to that system. So great point. And I think that dives directly into kind of our next key point that we wanted to make, and which you brought up, and I never really thought about it because it's kind of natural for me being in the public affairs space and working with civilians so much throughout my military career. But is that correspondence piece, whether it is a cover letter or an email or a phone call or any way you have a network, a LinkedIn message. You mentioned civilianizing even your correspondence with these employers or coordinators. Can we talk a little bit more about that, because I loved the fact that you brought that up.
I knew exactly where you're going when you started with that. Yes, definitely. And this is something I'm going to be quite frank. My husband was in the military, but I didn't know really how people corresponded to like one day I was looking over his shoulder and I'm like, why are you sending an email and it's formatted like this? Because I just didn't realize that there was a different way that you communicate in the military side of the house.
Mhm.
For example, if you don't know who you're emailing, in the military, you might say, "Dear sir" or "ma'am." But civilian side of the house, that's a very cold opening. That's
Mhm.
not very welcoming, and it doesn't sound like you're targeting somebody specific. So we want to make it feel a bit warmer. So that could be something as simple as taking that "dear sir" or "ma'am" and saying, "Dear hiring manager at Lockheed Martin, comma." So
Mhm.
now it's a bit warmer. I'm talking specifically to this person. I don't know who they are, but I'm making them feel like it's directed to them, or "Dear human resources," or "Dear whatever team," at the
Mhm.
company name. Again, just very warm, welcoming, maybe even a good morning, a good afternoon. I'm a very positive personality type, so that's one way I kind of put my personality into my correspondence. And
Mhm.
your closing should also be warm. And then I didn't
Mhm.
realize very respectfully was V/R for many years. I thought it was just a line break. I was like, oh, okay, just a line break signature block. Because civilian side of the house, we don't do V/R, and very
Mhm.
respectfully comes off a little rude. And rude is
Mhm.
putting it nicely. It's not a very warm closing. So
Mhm.
instead, maybe reframing it. Thank you. Have a
Yeah.
great day. Today's a Wednesday, so I always end my emails on Wednesday with "Have a wonderful Wednesday," like a little play on
Oh,
words, or "Have
yeah.
a terrific Thursday." If you know that they're a sports team fan, maybe they're Clemson they're going to super regionals, and I am a Clemson fan. If you're like, hey, I know that person's a Clemson fan, go Tigers,
Go
comma, first
Tigers.
name, last
Mhm.
name. Something that just shows that like little warm ending. It's not cold, it's nice and open and being very friendly,
Exactly, and I
or
think it was
professionally
just
friendly.
yes, and I think it was especially just funny to me is we're so used, at least in the military, so used to it may even be my sign off on my current signature very respectfully. But when we were speaking about this earlier, I was like, well, I would think that they would have the assumption that everything you just mentioned was sent with respect. So maybe, yeah, definitely change that outgoing signature for sure. Now, I know that this was, a whole bunch of amazing information and already so many great resources and tidbits of knowledge. But if, the military members in our audience want to get, more of a deep dive, where can they go, especially to see you, to get even further information on interview techniques, resume writing skills, all of the good stuff?
So you can head over to recruitmilitary.com/resume webinars, and that will
Mhm.
take you right to our webinar page. You can choose from civilian resume writing, federal resume writing, the advanced employment, which encompasses those other employment topics. We offer currently 5 different time zone slots. So just choose which one works best for your schedule. We have early morning, evening, middle of the day, lunchtime, lots of opportunities there. Just put your email in, sign up. All of them, except for the advanced employment, are 1 hour ones. You'll get a
Mhm.
resource list. You'll have the opportunity for a one-on-one or resume review following the webinar. And it's just a really great place to go for a deeper dive and to really get some of those specific questions answered. And I highly encourage you to check that out. Again, recruitmilitary.com/resume webinars. They go 3 weeks a month. This week is resume writing week. Will be
Woo-hoo.
federal resume week. Kind of works like clockwork. We start at the advanced
Mhm.
resume, we work our way down 1 week at a time, dedicated to them. And I think we have one more slide. I do want to show. I think there's one more as like a little pro tip to end on a high note. And this
Oh,
is
yeah.
one way that you can civilianize your awards, because that's a huge thing. Is okay. Well,
Mhm.
I might look at
Yes.
a resume and I'm like, what does this award mean? Like I don't have time to go to Google and type this in. So
Mhm.
in your experience section, give me a bullet point. Walk me through it.
Mhm.
Awarded an Army Commendation Medal for what? Who gave you this award? When did you get it? Show me why you received this honor or this recognition. There's another format down there too, recognized for what, by whom, or honored for. And that just makes it that much easier to show that person what that buy-in is and put it in those civilian terms by saying, oh, here's why I received it, without them having to ask this question about what is this? Like, what does this mean? Do it for them. Put it as a bullet
Exactly.
point.
Yes, and the good thing about these awards, whether it's a Navy Achievement Award, whatever, good conduct, whatever it is, you have a write-up that specifically tells you, I think, at least it should be for every branch, what you specifically did to earn that award. So that helps you out there with this write-up. But I know it can be difficult, especially if you've been in for a quite amount of time, whether you're retiring 10 years, 15 years, you've more than likely gathered quite a few awards, medals, accomplishments, and translating those into a way where people, again, you're civilianizing those awards. I think this is a perfect slide for that, because you're like, what, how do I explain a NAM to, like a director of sales or someone like that? So this is a perfect slide. Love it. Thank you. And as we wrap up, are there any other, nuggets of knowledge that we may have missed, or anything you have for our audience when it comes to translating those skills to a civilian employer?
Just make sure you keep your audience in mind. What do they need to know about what you've done, and
Mm-hmm.
how have you done that? And again, you don't have to get into specifics, especially if it's maybe, dealing with something different. Maybe it's not dealing with weapons and you were dealing with weapons before, but instead talking about hazardous materials, explosive items. Again, we don't need the specific, just give me the generalized version of it and then walk me through why I need to know that. Will everything you've done in the military be relevant? No, not to every audience. So just remember, what are they looking for? How do you fit that? Tell that story. Tell that, here's what I need in my job description. Show me how you are that person for that. And that will really help make sure that you're not providing extraneous information, where we might want to put everything we've ever done on there, but realistically they're not going to have time to go through all of that and see why it's important. So give them that 1 or 2 pager highlight of, here's what you need to know based off of this need that you have, which is that job description. I keep going back to job description just to tell you how important it is to have that and use that as your reference point as you're working on your documents. And that's going to help with the terminology too, because you have their terms, just putting what you've done in their words.
Yep, replicate those key words. And I think you mentioned, I don't know if we mentioned it during the live thus far, but what should the link, because I know it's a very popular question, people will comment, you're like, I have 4 pages worth of awesome stuff for my resume, but like, how I heard I should only have it on 1 page or 1 page front and back total. I know we have a couple minutes left, so if you want to dive into that a little bit more, because it's such a popular question everywhere we go.
It is. Normally, for anything except for federal is one of those weird, it has its own set of rules. But please, if you're going federal, check the job description, the job posting, because several agencies are implementing page maximums. And the ones that I have seen, I've seen 5. 5 is a very common page maximum for federal, but they still play by the same rules as civilians do. Like, what's relevant? Can you adjust what you've done to show that relevant piece in there? For civilian resumes, we're looking at 1, 2 pages, maybe 3. And by 3, like if we have 25 years of relevant experience, like we have been doing that thing, there is room for some extra, but most of the time you're going to see 2 or less pages. And even if we have significant experience, it's still going to cover maybe your past 10 years, because yes, you may have worked in the field since 2005, but 2005 was 19 years ago. What you've done 5 years ago should have priority and precedence over what happened 19 years ago. So I want to know more about the recent pieces. So realistically, even on a 2-pager, we're probably only going to hit 10, maybe 15 years on that resume, just because we need to have more examples on the front end.
And these are all things that you can definitely have a deeper dive into, more questions, more answers on your amazing seminars. Whitney, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a wealth of knowledge, especially for me. I always learn something from these lives, and I wish I was in the transitioning space again so I can go back and utilize these resources, because I feel like I'm missing out. Thank you so much for joining us today. And for all of the resources and links that we mentioned, we will be putting them in the comments for our audience members. Whitney, thank you. I can't wait to have you on again. It's always a pleasure, and I hope you have an amazing day.
Thanks for having me, Gabby. I hope everybody has a great day here. Remember your audience. Biggest tip, keep your audience in mind.
Fantastic. Thank you again, Whitney. And thank you to everyone that joined us today for another episode of Recruit Military Live. We'll see you next time.